Today, we're tackling one of history's biggest questions. How did the mighty Roman Empire, the superpower of the ancient world, actually fall? It wasn't one single event, but a perfect storm of problems that brought this giant to its knees. So grab your popcorn, because we're about to dive deep into the dramatic final act of the Western Roman Empire. It all starts to get shaky after the death of Emperor Theodosius I. In 395 CE, he made a fateful decision to split the empire between his two sons. One son got the east, which would become the wealthy and stable Byzantine Empire. The other son got the west, and well, that's where our story unfolds. This split wasn't just a line on a map. It divided resources, military power, and created two separate destinies. The west was instantly the poorer, less populated, and more vulnerable half. Inside the Western Empire, things were rotting from the core. Imagine an empire run by a series of weak, incompetent, and often corrupt emperors. Some were just children, controlled by generals or court officials who cared more about their own power than the good of Rome. Decisions were made for personal gain, not for the stability of the state. This constant political chaos meant there was no strong hand to guide the ship through the stormy seas ahead. The government became a revolving door of ineffective leaders, and the people's trust in their rulers completely eroded. While the politicians were playing their games, the economy was in a freefall. To pay for its massive army and the lavish lifestyles of the elite, the empire imposed crippling taxes on its citizens, especially the farmers and the working class. This heavy taxation crushed the middle class and made it impossible for small landowners to survive. Many abandoned their farms, leading to food shortages. To make matters worse, the empire started debasing its currency, mixing cheaper metals into their silver and gold coins. This caused rampant inflation, making money practically worthless. Trade routes that once brought immense wealth were now disrupted by constant instability and invasions. The economic engine of the empire was sputtering and about to die. And this is where the famous Barbarian Invasions come in. It's important to remember that these weren't just random attacks. For centuries, various Germanic tribes like the Goths and Vandals had lived on the borders of the empire. Some were integrated as soldiers, others were trade partners. But as a new, fearsome group, the Huns, led by the legendary Attila, swept in from the east, they pushed these tribes into Roman territory, seeking refuge. The Romans mishandled this migration crisis badly. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378, the Visigoths handed the Roman army a devastating defeat, showing everyone that the once invincible legions could be beaten. Over the next few decades, waves of Visigoths, Vandals, and others poured across the borders, sacking cities, including Rome itself in 410. The empire was losing control of its own territory, piece by piece. The final scene of this epic drama plays out in the year 476 CE. By this point, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. It was basically just Italy and a few scattered territories. The emperor was a young boy, ironically named Romulus Augustulus, combining the name of Rome's founder and its first emperor. But he held no real power. He was just a puppet. In 476, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed him. But instead of declaring himself the new emperor, Odoacer simply sent the imperial insignia, the symbols of power, to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople, basically saying, "We don't need an emperor in the West anymore." And just like that, with a whimper rather than a bang, the Western Roman Empire was gone. So the fall of Rome wasn't a single event, but a slow, painful decline caused by internal division, corruption, economic collapse, and external pressures. It's a powerful lesson from history about how even the greatest empires can crumble from within. What do you think was the biggest factor? Let me know in the comments below. It wasn't one single event, but a slow burn of problems that snowballed out of control. Today, we're counting down the 5 biggest reasons why Rome fell. Stick around because some of these might surprise you. Let's start with number 5, political instability. Imagine this, in just 50 years, Rome had over 20 emperors, and most of them met a violent end. This period, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, was pure chaos. Civil wars became the norm, with generals constantly fighting each other for the throne. With no stable leadership, the empire was like a ship without a captain, tossed around in a storm of its own making. This constant infighting weakened Rome from the inside out, making it vulnerable to all the other problems we're about to discuss. Coming in at number 4 is overextension. At its peak, the Roman Empire was massive, stretching from Britain to the Middle East. It sounds impressive, right? But it was a logistical nightmare. The empire became too big to govern effectively. Communication was slow. A message from Rome to Egypt could take weeks. Defending thousands of miles of border was nearly impossible and incredibly expensive. They had spread themselves too thin, and the administrative and military costs of maintaining such a vast territory were crippling. Now for number 3. The decline of the military. The legendary Roman legions, once the most disciplined and effective fighting force in the world, were a shadow of their former selves. As the empire grew, it became harder to recruit Roman citizens. So what did they do? They started hiring mercenaries, often from the very barbarian tribes they were supposed to be fighting. These soldiers had no real loyalty to Rome. They fought for money. When the pay was late or a better offer came along, their allegiance could switch in a heartbeat. This reliance on foreign troops was a recipe for disaster. At number 2, we have a severe economic crisis. Rome was bleeding money. Constant wars, a bloated government, and extravagant spending by emperors drained the treasury. To make matters worse, they relied heavily on slave labor from conquered lands. When the conquests stopped, so did the fresh supply of slaves. This led to a labor shortage, hurting agriculture and production. The government tried to solve its money problems by debasing the currency, mixing cheap metals into their gold and silver coins. This just led to runaway inflation, making the coins worthless and destroying the economy for the average citizen. And finally, the number 1 reason for the fall of Rome, the Barbarian Invasions. With a weakened military, a bankrupt government, and internal chaos, the borders were wide open. Various Germanic tribes, like the Goths and the Vandals, who had been pushed west by the Huns, began pouring into Roman territory. At first, some were integrated, but soon they came as conquerors. The final nail in the coffin was in 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The invasions weren't the sole cause, but they were the final, decisive blow to an empire that was already crumbling from within. So there you have it, a perfect storm of political chaos, overextension, military decay, economic ruin, and outside invasions that brought the mighty Roman Empire to its knees. It's a powerful lesson from history about how even the greatest powers can fall. What do you think was the biggest factor? Imagine this. The year is 410 CE, the gates of Rome, the eternal city, a beacon of power for over 800 years, are thrown open not for a triumphant general, but for an invading army. This wasn't just any army. It was the Visigoths, led by a man named Alaric, and they were about to do the unthinkable. For 3 days, the city that had conquered the known world was itself conquered, plundered, and humbled. How did this happen? How did the heart of the mightiest empire on earth fall so spectacularly? The story is a dramatic mix of betrayal, desperation, and revenge. The Visigoths weren't just random invaders. They were former allies, soldiers who had fought and bled for Rome. But the empire, weakened by internal strife and a crumbling economy, had broken its promises. Payments were missed, treaties were ignored, and Alaric's people were left on the brink of starvation. He had tried to negotiate, to reason with the emperor, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. So backed into a corner, he marched on the city itself. The news of Rome's fall sent shockwaves across the entire ancient world. It was an emotional and psychological earthquake. People from Britain to Jerusalem couldn't believe it. Rome was more than just a city. It was an idea, a symbol of order, civilization, and permanence. If Rome could fall, what was safe? It was like hearing that the sun had simply gone out. For many, this marked the true symbolic end of Roman dominance. It was the moment the invincibility of the empire was shattered forever. But the fall of Rome wasn't just an end. It was also a beginning. This single event acted as a massive catalyst, accelerating the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and paving the way for a new era. As Roman authority dissolved, new kingdoms, the very foundations of modern European nations, began to rise from the ashes. The power vacuum left by Rome was filled by warlords, kings, and eventually, the Church, shaping the political and cultural landscape of the Middle Ages in ways we still see today. The sacking of Rome was the dramatic final act of one age and the explosive curtain raiser for the next. Ever heard of a kid emperor ruling a crumbling empire? Meet Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Picture this. It's the 5th century, and the once mighty Rome is on its last legs. Constant internal strife, economic collapse, and relentless barbarian invasions have worn it down to a shadow of its former self. In 475 CE, a Roman general named Orestes staged a coup and, instead of taking the throne himself, he placed his own young son, Romulus, on it. The name was tragically ironic Romulus after the founder of Rome, and Augustulus, a diminutive of Augustus, the first emperor. He was little Augustus, a boy king for a diminished empire. He was more of a puppet than a ruler, a symbol of just how far Rome had fallen. Meanwhile, the real power was shifting. The Roman army was full of Germanic soldiers, and their leader, a skilled general named Odoacer, was tired of being treated as a second-class citizen. He had demanded land for his troops in Italy, a request that was flatly denied by Orestes. So Odoacer did what any ambitious general of the era would do. He marched on the capital, Ravenna. In 476 CE, Odoacer's forces captured and executed Orestes. He then faced the young emperor, Romulus Augustulus. But instead of killing him, Odoacer simply deposed him. He saw no threat in the boy. He sent the imperial regalia, the symbols of Roman power, to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople, with a message that basically said, "We don't need an emperor in the West anymore." And just like that, after nearly 1,000 years, the Western Roman Empire was gone. So why did the Eastern half, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, survive? Well, it was wealthier, more urbanized, and had a more defensible capital in Constantinople. It managed its military and political affairs much more effectively, allowing it to endure for another 1,000 years. The fall of Romulus Augustulus wasn't a cataclysmic battle, but a quiet symbolic end. It marked the transition from antiquity to the Middle Ages. The legacy of Rome didn't vanish. Of course, its language, laws, and culture shaped the world we live in today. But the story of the boy emperor serves as a powerful reminder that even the greatest empires can fade away. Not always with a bang, but sometimes with a whimper. When you think of the Roman Empire, you probably picture legions, gladiators, and the Colosseum. And you might think it all came crashing down in 476 CE when the last emperor in the West was deposed. But what if I told you that was only half the story? That for another 1,000 years, the Roman Empire lived on? This is the story of Rome's second life, the Byzantine Empire. After the Western Empire fell, the Eastern half, with its magnificent new capital, Constantinople, not only survived but thrived. This wasn't just a successor state. These people were Romans. They called themselves Romans, and their emperors ruled in an unbroken line all the way back to Augustus. Constantinople was the new Rome, a city strategically placed between Europe and Asia, protected by massive walls and a bustling harbor. It was the largest and wealthiest city in Europe for centuries. One of its most legendary emperors was Justinian the Great. In the 6th century, he dreamed of restoring the empire to its former glory. His brilliant general, Belisarius, launched ambitious campaigns to reconquer lost territories. For a fleeting, glorious moment, North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain were brought back under Roman rule. Justinian didn't just expand the borders. He also codified Roman law into the famous Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal masterpiece that still influences legal systems worldwide. And of course, he commissioned the Hagia Sophia, an architectural marvel that still takes your breath away today. But Byzantium wasn't just a carbon copy of old Rome. Over the centuries, it developed its own unique character. While Latin remained the language of law for a time, Greek became the language of the people, the church, and the government. This fusion created a vibrant civilization that blended Roman political traditions, Greek culture, and Christian faith. They were masters of art, creating stunning mosaics and icons. They were pioneers in diplomacy and espionage, and they acted as a vital shield, protecting Western Europe from numerous invasions from the East for centuries. But all empires, even one as resilient as this, eventually faced their end. After centuries of struggle, sieges, and political turmoil, the final blow came in 1453. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror, breached the legendary walls of Constantinople. The fall of the city sent shockwaves across the Christian world. For many, this was the true end of the Roman Empire, a legacy that had endured for over 2,000 years. So the next time you hear about the fall of Rome, remember the incredible story of its eastern half. The Byzantine Empire was a dazzling, complex, and enduring civilization that carried the torch of Rome for a millennium, shaping the world in ways we're still feeling today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into history interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.